we're gonna sing happy birthday to Ella. So if you sing really, really loud, wherever you are. All right, ready? Here we go. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Ella. Happy birthday to you.
Thanks, everybody.
Now, Miriam, would you like to sing happy birthday in German?
No. I don't have happy birthday in German.
Do you really?
Yeah.
You should sing it
Well, come on, two of you do it together.
Zum Geburtstag viel Glück. Zum Geburtstag viel Glück. Zum Geburtstag viel Glück. I don't want to listen to myself sing to everybody.
Well, this is gonna go viral. Let's see, yeah, and in Portuguese, parabéns pra você, nesta data querida, muitas felicidades, muitos anos de vida. And let's see, what other language do we have here? Yeah, okay.
I have a question.
Which language?
No. English, please.
All right.
There's like 2 open spots on here for the 8 and 11. Did you forget to bring it last?
Yeah, last week you forgot to bring your.
Go ahead and fill it in.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll have my wife double check that. Yeah, sorry about that. Okay, we need to keep moving here. We're having too much fun. But what good is it to go to class if you can't have fun, right? This thing keeps shutting off on me. I think it's trying to hint. All right, now we studied Ralph Winter already a little bit. So, by the way, everybody's going to be here for the final exam, right? Nobody needs to be gone for this or that. I think we're all okay. All right, oops.
Is it Wednesday at 10 a.m.?
It's Wednesday at 10 a.m., I think, yes. Okay, we filled in some of this, correct?
Yeah.
Yes.
About Ralph Winter, thank you. Remember, Donald McGavran and Ralph Winter are names that you should probably keep together in your mind. Remember that Donald McGavran is the one that invited Ralph Winter to come and join him on the faculty at Fuller. Well, he did it through the administration. Okay, is this where we stopped?
Yeah.
Yeah.
He served 10 years in Guatemala. So where did Donald McGavran serve? Grew up and served in
India?
India, right? So totally different background for Winter. Grew up in California. When he went to Guatemala, served with his wife Roberta. Then invited by Donald McGavran to teach at Fuller School of World Missions, and he taught there for 10 years. He had a good ministry there with them. And then he ended up leaving Fuller because he really wanted to find a practical way to disseminate information about missions and cultures, people groups, and all that stuff. And so he founded the U.S. Center for World Mission. I'm actually going to take you online there in just a moment to talk about that, right? Oh, am I going too fast for you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, go ahead and get what you need there. It has become an incredible resource tool, as we'll see in a few moments here when we look at it. So Matthew, you typing all this stuff by hand?
Yeah. I didn't even know there was like
Me too.
fill in blank notes. I think like halfway through the semester, I saw like Laura had that. And I was like, oh, I didn't even know that.
Oh,
Because like all my
sorry, man.
classes, I just make a Google Doc and then just like type it.
Well, you probably are going to get more out of it anyway, just because when you type it yourself.
Sure.
We all caught up? All right. So, yeah, this is now called Frontier Ventures. The outgrowth of the center, they developed the William Carey Library. Have you read books from William Carey Library before? I'm guessing some of you probably have. A lot of good missions biographies have been published by them. And they're usually written on kind of like a middle school, high school level so that children can really take advantage of them. The American Society of Missiology came out of that. And then there are a lot of missiological societies, by the way, now. I belong to one called the Evangelical Missiological Society, EMS. Be probably similar to this one. The theological education by extension was an idea that Ralph Winter developed. And basically what it is it's designed for people that can't leave home to go to Bible college in other countries. So you allow them to study where they live, like a lot of pastors. They don't have the, I'll let you fill this. I usually give it to you one at a time, but this whole thing showed up at once, so go ahead and put that in. In Brazil, for instance, I taught at a seminary, but there were a lot of pastors that weren't able to come because they pastored in small churches. They couldn't leave to come to Bible college. So we would periodically, like on a weekend, travel down. Let's say I went down like on a Friday after classes on a bus, and then we would have a course like maybe all day Saturday, maybe Friday evening, and then all day Saturday. And then we would preach maybe in their church on Sunday, then come back, Sunday night or whatever. And they were able to earn credits little by little by studying at a distance. No Zoom, no internet back at that time, right? We actually traveled physically to those locations. But he started this idea of theological education by extension. Frontier Fellowship, there was actually a magazine that they published called Frontier Magazine, still there, I'll show you. And then William Carey International University, which I think is online. I'm going to have to look at that when we get on their site here in a second. And he viewed missions as a wartime lifestyle. In other words, we're always preparing ourselves. We're always in training. When you think of people in military, they have to constantly be in shape, be up to date. He wanted people to be on the cutting edge, not because it was cool to be on the cutting edge, but because it's necessary. The world is usually way ahead of us, in their thinking. They tend to think of things a lot and not always good things. And so he wanted people to have resources to keep up. So he wanted to motivate American churches by providing this resource for them and growing church movement. Now, okay, here's what I'm going to do. Let me just get out of this for a second, and we're going to go on the site. So let me pull this in. So here, if I pull this over here, if you type in U.S. Center for World Mission, USCWM, you will see the very first one that comes up is U.S. Center for World Mission - Welcome to Frontier Ventures. And that's because for years it was known as U.S. Center for World Mission, so a lot of people would call it by that name, but they've transitioned to the U.S. Center for World or to Frontier Ventures. So let's go on there, take a look at it. You're going to notice it right away. If you look, you'll see some evidences that they have a little different philosophy approach to missions. Okay. Lots and lots of places to look here. Here, we are a community of Jesus followers who long to see the fullness of God's blessing for all peoples and the reconciliation of all things in Christ. Reconciliation is a subject we'll talk about in current issues. Who's had current issues already? None of you? That's a technical term in missions that means something that I at least would not, promote. But if you go down here, notice it started in 1976, okay? That's when he started the U.S. Center for World Mission. Look at all the things that this is up there. They call it a family of ministries. Look at them all. Let's see. I'm going to take you've already been on the Joshua Project before. This one up here on the right. So Joshua Project, there's a link to it right down here. And I mean, you could spend months combing through this stuff. It's really over the top. They really, really do a good job. Remember at the banquet when we had those center things in the middle of the tables? We got them off of here. We took their prayer idea, the prayer resource here, and we printed out 300 and I forget how many, 400 almost for everybody to have one. That's where these came from. So in a sense, we were promoting the Joshua Project with you guys. Another one, let's go back. I mentioned, notice Institute for Community Transformation. There's another buzzword. That idea of transformation is more that idea of working to transform society, which, you know, is a little bit different direction, the emphasis that we would take, and we'll get into that next semester. Are you familiar with Perspectives? Some of you have used articles out of the Perspective. It's a whole course, big fat book like this, about $35. And here, I'll just take you to the site. They've done 4, I think, editions now, unless I'm, let me see. And I've used articles out of there. I'm looking for the actual copies. Maybe I missed it up here at the top. They should have a place to buy it. Program contact. What is Perspectives? Okay, anyway, we've used that resource a time or two. Another. Excuse me. Okay, here's William Carey Publishing. And you guys might want to take advantage of these because they really are good. We got a lot of good books, and we've read some with our kids. I'm looking for the university. I'm wondering if they don't have that anymore, unless they've renamed it. Let me see. Yeah, okay, I don't see that university anymore, so maybe that's a thing of the past. Okay, so anyway, this is a contribution that Ralph Winter made that I think is really to his credit. I think God has used it. And pull this back up here. Keep on here. Oops. All right. Okay. His focus on a growing church movement, he kind of got that from Donald McGavran. The idea of emphasis on church growth statistics and things like that. I don't know if it's fair to say that today the idea of the church planting movement has come out of that. We really haven't studied that much, but the church planting movement is this idea of starting hundreds and thousands of churches, you know, just in a few years' time. And there's a lot to be said about that we don't have time to get into. Unfortunately, a lot of what they call churches are just basically a mom and dad come to Christ and they start a church in their home, you know, and that's now a church. So you have all these small groups, these people that come to Christ and they have a church in their house. So it's something that I'm a little concerned about. I think it kind of waters down the concept of New Testament local church. Okay, anyway, this Leslie Newbegin. Okay, do you remember his name from another study? Was it Leslie or was it? No, sorry. Stephen Neal was the one we studied. Amy Carmichael had a romantic interest in Stephen Neal. That's a different guy. My apologies. But they're both Anglicans. Okay. Leslie Newbegin was born in England in 1909. He had Christian parents. Okay. And like a lot of people, he came to a phase in his life where he kind of had it with God, had it with authority, and he decided to abandon Christianity. But here we go again, Now, the student Christian movement is the corresponding movement in England to what movement here?
Haystack.
Yeah, which became morphed into the student volunteer movement. So the student Christian movement is pretty much the same thing in England. He claims to have had a vision of the cross. Okay, that's fine. I'm not going to spend time debating that, you know. But God uses everything. You've probably had a bad dream somewhere that God used somehow, you know, in your life. He really was focused on evangelism, which is to his credit. He did soapbox preaching. Is that a new idea, soapbox preaching? You guys?
That'd be like street evangelism?
Because Miriam, you probably have you heard soapbox? Because back in like the early 1900s, people would order soap and they would deliver it in these big wooden boxes. So they would use those boxes as step stools. Or they'd go out in public. If you wanted to preach in public or something, you could step on because they were sturdy. They're made out of wood. So soapbox preaching is an idea that came out of that. That used to be really popular in our country back in like the 1800s, early 1900s. And he did that. And he preached in India. And he was actually influenced by Roland Allen, who was also an Anglican bishop, but who wrote a lot about missions. And Roland Allen's a guy worth reading. Just there's so much to read that he believed in what he called spontaneous expansion of the church. And the idea of that is that we are probably, he would say that we're too intentional in organizing a church and getting everything just right before we start another church. He liked the idea of a lot of people starting churches, getting people out, starting new churches. So again, that idea of mass church planting or church planting movements probably was influenced by him to some degree. He was the first bishop of the United Church of South India, Bangalore area. That's when I've gone to India, that's where I've gone, to South India. That's where Josh Chatla is from. Josh Chatla, he's from South India. But you should know his name because he was one of the 20th century's most influential missiologists. He wrote a lot about missions. What are some differences? He did not agree with Donald McGavran, who also served in India, okay, for a time. I don't know how much contact they had, if any, in India. But Newmagin believed in rapid spread, and McGavran believed in rapid growth. Do you know what the difference is between those two? I mean, they could sound almost synonymous, but they had two different things in mind. Rapid spread sounds like what?
Multiple people hear the gospel in a large group.
Okay, spreading out with the gospel. Rapid growth sounds like what?
A bunch of people getting saved.
Well, but getting established, going deeper, getting them grounded in the word. So, and actually, if you think about it, both of those concepts have a place. They're both good, right? When Jesus said, take the gospel to every creature, every nation, that sounds like rapid spread. Get it all over the globe, right? But he also said, teaching them to observe all things I've commanded you. That's the growth part. So really, when you think of ministry, both of these components need to play a role. We need to see churches started, the gospel spreading to the ends of the earth, but people in those churches need to grow. Okay? McGavran's idea of rapid growth is it's not just the pastor or the church planter doing all the teaching. It's believers teaching believers, involving, remember, he believed in involving everybody. And so, and the fact is, very, very few people are good at both of these. I mean, think of yourself. Some of you are probably better at the idea of just, getting the gospel out and spreading the word, whereas others of you might say, no, I'm better at helping a group of believers to grow and become established in their faith. And that's really where I am. I do a much better job in the second area but both of them need to be a part. And so, they disagreed over the emphasis, I think, probably more than anything else. And then he disagreed with McGavran's homogeneous unit principle. Do you remember what that was? We mentioned that last week. What is the homogeneous unit principle? Do you remember the word homogeneous? It's a compound word, what it means.
Everything's the same.
Same what? Homo, same. And what comes from the word genius?
People.
Yeah, genetics, the ethnicity. Remember, McGavran believed in going after one ethnic group and instead of confusing people, making it harder by having multi-ethnic churches. And Leslie Newbigin was one of those that disagreed with him on that. He thought that you should be trying to reach everybody around you, regardless of their ethnicity, and let God decide what the mixture of the church is going to look like. But again, I would tell you, both of those are legitimate. God works in both ways. Okay? If you come and tell me, Matthew, I'm going to New York City and God has burdened me to minister to Jews in New York City. I wouldn't be comfortable saying, well, if there are Chinese and Italians and others living around there, you can't neglect them. If God burdened you to reach Jews in New York, then I'm not going to question that. See, but if somebody else goes and says, I'm just going to live in Manhattan and I'm going to reach out to everybody that I can in that city, regardless of who they are, I'm not going to question that either. God uses both and. Okay? Contributions during retirement after 35 years in India. Let me get here. Okay. Just a minute, I'm looking for something here. Okay. Well, okay, here we go. Yeah, at the top of 436, Newbigin was a practicing missiologist during his 35 years in India, but his greatest contributions to the field came after he officially retired. Back at home in Birmingham at the age of 65, he had imagined that he would spend his remaining years teaching and writing. Instead, he discovered that England had become a foreign mission field. So even after he spent 35 years in India, he came back and was burdened to reach the very country he'd grown up in. He didn't just retire and quit, but he contributed to the work of missions in his own land, which is commendable, didn't just retire and stop. So he had a desire to teach and write. He was shocked that England had become a mission field, and he actually took a church that was about ready to close, was able to keep it open. And he had this idea that the gospel should be countercultural. How do you understand that? What does it mean? If I say the gospel should be countercultural, what does that mean? Well, if I say that the gospel should be cultural, what does that mean?
Is it saying that it should be offensive to some people? Maybe
It should, this view?
the gospel should be
Yeah, he's saying, don't try to make your church look like the culture. And, and I don't know exactly to what extent he took this position, but I think he was reacting against this idea of the church just blending into the culture, all right? If something is culturally popular right now, then let's make it popular in the church to reach the culture, okay? Let's conform to whatever our culture is in order to attract people. His idea was people need to see a difference in Christians, not something that's the same as what they already have, okay? So what do you think about that? Do you think a church should be cultural or countercultural in that sense?
I think it should be both because it shouldn't accept things in culture that are wrong, but you shouldn't go to church feeling super uncomfortable and like you have to adapt to something new.
All right.
So, I don't know.
In what areas can a church be cultural?
music.
Okay. Is it okay to sing and play genres that have been produced in the 21st centuries? Well, it depends, right? I mean, it's on, if that genre has a strong, it's been used exclusively for something very evil, you probably are going to want to avoid it to avoid guilt by association. But yeah, in general. Anything else? What else in church should be cultural?
The atmosphere and like clothing styles. Like every church is different, but you walk in and the people from the community, whatever they kind of do in their normal life comes in, and if they're more talkative, and the church is more friendly, or, it kind of fits the people.
Okay, all right, good, yeah. In other words, go ahead, Sharon.
And the preaching should be cultural too.
And what's, will be,
How you preach in one part of the world might be different from where you're going to preach somewhere else.
okay,
So in Romania, the church that we went to, it was a village church. So Luke, I can't remember their last name, the Warners.
yeah,
Luke Warner, he didn't use like big words that a lot of people don't understand because they don't go to school, those people. And
Okay.
they're also, most of them are not really Christians. And then you want to use the same illustrations that they might use.
mhm,
So like my other sister who goes to maybe Bloomfield or like a church out in farmlands, then they use more illustrations that are
Mhm.
more relatable to the people who work farms, I guess.
okay, all right. Yeah, cultural sensitivity is not a bad thing. Because there are elements of culture that are amoral, they're not right or wrong in themselves. Okay. But I think Newbegin was reacting against churches that became so culturally sensitive that they never really preached the true gospel. They didn't want to step on people's toes and offend and all that. And so he kind of reacted to that by saying, we should be countercultural. So there's a balance, like everything else, and you're going to have to determine what you think that balance is, how you do that. Yep. All right. Bob Pierce, man, so much good to say about him, and yet some really not good. He was actually born in Fort Dodge, Iowa. Okay, the beginning of World War I, at least U.S. involvement in World War I. He founded World Vision. Have you heard of World Vision before? It's been huge. He was known as one of the 10 most traveled men in the world. He was traveling 10 months every year. Unfortunately, that's what turned out to be bad for him. Why? Well, we'll come back to that in a little bit. He traveled especially throughout the Far East, China, and that whole region of what we call the Far East. And he raised hundreds of thousands of dollars for social and evangelistic causes worldwide. The guy was a gifted fundraiser. And he would take these gifts with him when he traveled around the world and to encourage people. I mean, in terms of his ministry participation, the guy was uniquely gifted, very, very successful. He founded Samaritan's Purse, which still exists today. It's a way of contributing to special missions projects around the world, helping your neighbor.
I thought Samaritan's Purse was Franklin Graham.
It says online that he did Samaritan's Purse.
Okay, good. But this is where he struggled, family and leadership struggles. Mentioned Franklin Graham doing Samaritan's Purse?
Yeah, it says that the organization's president right now, I guess, is Franklin Graham.
Okay. Type in World Vision, see if it's still functioning right now. World Vision. You might get all kinds of things if you type that, I don't know. What did he come up with? Anything?
What was number 6? Sorry.
Oh. He founded Samaritan's Purse. Is there anything under World Vision there?
Yeah, it looks like it's still functioning.
Okay. All right. man, this guy, it's frustrating. Because here's a guy that was incredibly used, incredibly talented, but he had to pay a price to do this. So what happened? Well, his work left little time. I mean, if you're on the road 10 months out of the year, how much time? And remember, no internet back then, right? No email. I mean, letters have to be sent through mail. They take weeks. Just almost no contact with his family. Traveled by himself. And not only that, but he clashed with his board of directors, and he ended up resigning from World Vision in 1967. I mean, he built it, and yet he became so headstrong and was, that eventually he resigned. He saw the handwriting on the wall. He saw that it was going to destroy the whole thing. And then he had a daughter, Sharon, who struggled with depression and eventually committed suicide. Now, I'm going to pause here and say something. I am not saying that his daughter struggled and committed suicide because of him. That's just not. If I could prove that, that'd be different. But I can't, because there are people who have been very faithful as parents who have had children who've struggled. I talked to a retired pastor recently who has a son that's completely turned his back on the faith, an adopted son that just wants nothing to do with him anymore. And I know this pastor pretty well. Godly family man, loved his kids, but sometimes this happens, okay? But I do know that there were times when she cried out to her dad to please come home, please, and he was too busy. Probably never realized. He probably just thought that she was going to work through it and she'd be okay. And then all of a sudden to find out that she has killed herself. So here's what I would say to you. Make sure when you have a family, make sure that you are the kind of a parent and a spouse that would make something like this a mystery, why this would happen. Don't be the kind of a parent or spouse that if this kind of thing happens, you have to say, I should have known. See, you can't go back and retrace those. When we were in Brazil, I learned to say no a lot. I had a colleague that came down, and he was good for me. He was really strong-willed, and he said to me once, "You have a hard time saying no, don't you?" I said, "Yeah, it's hard." And frankly, part of the reason I didn't want to say no is because I wanted to have a good reputation. I wanted my colleagues to believe that I was a hard worker, that I was a team player. And he looked at me and he said, I'm just the opposite. When somebody asks me to do something, I almost always say no. I thought, I'm going to need this guy. I don't want to go that far, but I needed this guy. And if you don't learn to say no in life to everybody that needs you for something good, then you may end up, this guy was a workaholic. I think that much I can say without exaggeration. And his heart was totally in his work, but his family got left behind. So just be really, really careful. There's a temptation in life, if you can take the next step up the ladder, to do it, and another step. Then and a lot of times there's small steps, but and all of a sudden you look back and you realize I've completely left my family out of this. And you can't go back and recover that. So just be careful. He ended up dying in September of 1978. I graduated from high school in June of 1978. Came to college August. Just the time he died. He was born in, what was it, what was the year he was born, 1909? Did I even say? 14. So he lived how long? Do the math. 64 years old. Okay. Yeah, I mean, here's a picture of him. This kind of stuff was all over the news. Remember back then, people like him were not a dime a dozen, Just he had all kinds of pictures and advertisements, raising funds. He would show pictures like this, people would give money, send to these poor, needy children. But he had a poor, needy family that he neglected. So just be careful. All right. This guy wrote a book, Bruce Olson. Does anybody know the name of the book?
Bruco or.
Bruchko, yep.
Yeah.
It was named, that's the way that the people in Papua New Guinea pronounced Bruce, Bruchko, or maybe it was Pastor Bruce. But anyways, yeah. He was born in Minnesota in 1941. He's still alive, as far as I know. I mean, I printed this a few years ago. I may have died. He went to Columbia at age 19. Okay. And he was involved in linguistics. This guy was good. He reduced the language of the Motilones to writing. It was a language that did not have a written form, only spoken. And he was able to reduce it to a written language. He translated several New Testament books into their language as a tribe in Colombia. He taught them about health and agriculture. Just a very gifted guy. And he even won friendships with 5 Colombian presidents, and he appeared before the United Nations. Woo-hoo! This guy was really gifted. Right? And he wrote Bruchko. I have it in my library. He was captured by who? What's gorilla mean? Remember what the word means? I put it on the board last time.
I still don't remember.
Little War.
Little war, or little warriors, yep, the idea of guerrilla warfare is little groups of people surprise attacking, things like that. But he was released. Unlike Chet Bitterman, who was captured and ended up dying, Bruce Olson was released after 9 months. Okay, yeah, again, I don't know if he's still alive now. You can check him out, 1941, that'd make him 60, 85. So, but it's a really neat story. Neat story. All right, who's Brother Andrew? You heard of him? He wrote a book, a very famous book that came out in the 70s. Might have been the 60s, called God's Smuggler. You ever hear that book, God's Smuggler? It was all over. I mean, everybody in the United States knew that book. Because what he would do is he would smuggle Bibles and, mostly Bibles behind the Iron Curtain. Take them behind where where Christianity was forbidden. And a lot of controversy about the ethics of doing that and so on. He was born the same year my mother was, 1928, in the Netherlands. He enjoyed war games, so he probably played Call of Duty. Do they have a 1928 version of Call of Duty? I doubt it. He suffered during the Nazi occupation of Holland. Okay, so right in the middle of World War II. And later on, he joined the Dutch army, and he was known for being eccentric. He would do things at risk. He would go out and do risky things that should have killed him. And his fellow soldiers and everybody would thought the guy was nuts for doing that. He was actually wounded at one point in battle, and that's when he began reading the Bible. So God used his eccentric nature to get him wounded. He read the Bible. He came to Christ in Holland in 1950, which is the year of the Korean War. So he was what? He was 22 years old when he came to Christ. Okay. He joined the Dutch Reformed Church, and they required 12 years of training. Woo! You think you guys got a long time to train? 12 years? You gotta be kidding. And he went to London to learn English. It's a good place to learn it. British English. And then he went to Scotland, and he graduated from World Evangelization Crusade, I think. I think it is, in 1955, right? Did a lot of schooling. Weck had no ministry behind the Iron Curtain, and that's what he wanted to do. He wanted to get Bibles, reading materials to people behind the Iron Curtain. And how did he get advertised? He saw an advertisement for a youth fest in Warsaw. Warsaw is the capital of? Come on, you guys. Warsaw. Poland. Poland is Poland border on Germany? I can't remember. It does. Yeah. I should know that. And so he decides, I'm gonna get the word of God into the hands of these people. How are we doing there? Yeah, I'm pushing kind of hard here, but so as I said, the question is going to arise: how honest do you have to be to authorities that are against getting the word of God into their country? Ethical question. There were no Bibles. He went into Warsaw for this youth fest, and he discovered they didn't have Bibles. Some of them maybe had little pieces of a few verses or something that they smuggled in. And there were no Bibles in Czechoslovakia, which is now Czech Republic and Slovakia. It's divided, and Yugoslavia didn't have any. And he made a promise to God that he would bring Bibles to these people. That was his burden. So he wrote God's Smuggler. Even though it was written back in the 60s or 70s, it is worth the read. It informed the world about his work. That's why he wrote it. He wanted the world to know, look, there are places that have because all of Europe and America, not all of Europe, but Western Europe and America, had the word of God. So people gave money toward this. I grew up in a time when people gave money for everything. I remember my mom, they had these commercials, send your dollars to CARE, and CARE is an acronym for something, or save the children. My mom's writing a check and sending it in the mail, and then, with time, people began to discover, okay, some of these organizations are just using you to make money. The money's not getting to the children. And so a lot of people became suspicious of these kinds of organizations. Oops, let me see here. Yeah, the book informed communist authorities about his work. And so eventually they stopped his ministry. They found out that he was coming into their countries, and they barred him from coming. They would not give him a visa to come in. So he founded a ministry called Open Doors. Why? Because these countries were considered to be closed doors to the gospel. Initially, it focused on Eastern Europe and the USSR, which doesn't exist today, right? It was United Soviet Socialist Republic. It shifted to a focus on China and the Muslim world. So continued raising money, but it was being channeled to different places. He believed you have to obey God rather than men. So, if man says you can't bring the gospel in here, God says we have to take the word to the world. So I'm going to find some way to bring it in. You're disobeying God, so I have no obligation to honor you. Okay? So this takes you all the way back to Romans 13, right? Obey civil authorities, but then you have Peter and John saying we ought to obey God rather than men. So how do you know when you could disobey? There were mixed reactions. Some thought that he was unethical. An article or a book called Operation Pearl that kind of criticized his work. But positively, some said, no, he's doing what's necessary to obey the Great Commission. We've got to, if people are enemies of God, we have to recognize that we're going to be enemies. We're going to be their enemies because we are commissioned to take the gospel. Oops, sorry. What he would do, one of his tactics was, I got to finish with this. When you had long lines of people wanting to get through a checkpoint in an Eastern Bloc country, he would try to either get to the very beginning of the line or at the very end. Because when the officials, the immigration officers, saw the long line, they would usually hurry the first people through, then they'd slow down a little bit, and then near the end of the day, they would kind of rush the last few people through. He saw that, and he said, okay, that's how I'm going to do it. In fact, I had a professor in college that was from East Germany back when it was divided. And that's what he did. He would go during Christmas break and take Bibles. He would either get near the beginning of the line or at the end of the line to try to get the fast-moving crowd. And Brother Andrew said he would pray, Lord, you open the eyes of the blind. Now I'm asking you to blind the eyes of the seeing so they won't. And he took the Bibles right in the boxes or covered up wherever, and he would, and many times they just would let him through without checking them. So you can imagine there's controversy on both sides of what he did, and people disagreed. But what I will say is that he really did a great work in helping people in those countries get copies of the Word of God. All right, we need to talk about Helen Rosenberg. Maybe I can sneak something in on tomorrow about her before we start a review. She's quite late. All right, thank you. Actually, we've gotten farther than I thought.